Hello, boys and girls, and bigger boys and girls, and everybody else. Welcome back to Story Time with Uncle John. Or just John, if I'm not your uncle. In fact, I'm only the uncle to two people. So, yeah. Anyway, right, let's carry on, shall we? So, we're back with Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator, written by this guy. Yeah, Roald Dahl. Now, yesterday, we left it off in a very, very tense scene. Something has just appeared in the lift. And I'm looking at it right now, and I'm going to show you what it is as well. Right? Yes, marvellous. So, let's just dive straight in. Okay, Chapter 7. In fact, I'll read the last few lines from Chapter 6 just to catch you up. Right? So the lift doors are sliding open. Something thick. Something brown. Something not exactly brown, but greenish brown. Something with slimy skin and large eyes squatting inside the lift there was. Chapter 7. Something nasty in the lifts. Grandma Josephine had stopped screaming now. She'd gone rigid with shock. The rest of the group by the bed, including Charlie and Grandpa Joe, had become as still as stone. They dared not move. They dared hardly breathe. And Mr. Wonka, who had swung quickly around to look when the first scream came, was as dumbstruck as the rest. He stood motionless, gaping at the thing in the lift, his mouth slightly open, his eyes stretched wide as two wheels. What he saw, what they all saw, was this. It looked more than anything like an enormous egg, balanced on its pointed end. It was as tall as a big boy and wider than the fattest man. The greenish-brown skin had a shiny, wettish appearance, and there were wrinkles on it. About 3/4 of the way up, in the widest part, there were two large round eyes as big as teacups. The eyes were white, but each had a brilliant red pupil in the centre. The red pupils were resting on Mr. Wonka. Here we go. But now they began travelling slowly across to Charlie and Grandpa Joe and the others by the bed, settling upon them and gazing at them with a cold, malevolent stare. The eyes were everything. There was no other feature, no nose or mouth or ears, but the entire egg-shaped body was itself moving very slightly, pulsing and bulging gently here and there, as though the skin were filled with some thick fluid. At this point, Charlie suddenly noticed that the next lift was coming down. The indicator numbers above the door were flashing. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. L for lobby. There was a slight pause. The door slid open, and there, inside the second lift, was another enormous, slimy, wrinkled, greenish-brown egg with eyes. Now the numbers were flashing above all 3 of the remaining lifts. Down they came. Down, 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 down. And soon, at precisely the same time, they reached the lobby floor. The door slid open. 5 open doors now, 1 creature in each. 5 in all, and 5 pairs of eyes with brilliant red centres, all watching Mr. Wonka and watching Charlie and Grandpa Joe and the others. There were slightly different sizes and shapes between the 5, but all had the same greenish-brown wrinkled skin, and the skin was rippling and pulsing. For about 30 seconds, nothing happened. Nobody stirred, nobody made a sound. The silence was terrible. So was the suspense. Charlie was so frightened he felt himself shrinking inside his skin. Then he saw the creature in the left-hand lift suddenly start to change shape. Its body was slowly becoming longer and longer and thinner, going up and towards the roof of the lift. Not straight up, but curving a little to the left, making a snake-like curve that was curiously graceful up to the left, and then curling over to the top, to the right, and coming down again in a half circle. And then the bottom end began to grow out as well, like a tail, creeping along the floor to the left, until at last the creature, which had originally looked like a huge egg, now looked like a long, curvy serpent standing up on its tail. Oh! Then the one in the next lift began stretching itself in much the same way, and what a weird and oozy thing it was to watch. It was twisting itself into a shape that was a bit different from the first, balancing itself almost, but not quite, on the tip of its tail. Then The 3 remaining creatures began stretching themselves all at the same time, each one elongating itself slowly upwards, growing taller and taller, thinner and thinner, curving and twisting, stretching and stretching, curling and bending, balancing either on the tail or on the head or both, and turned sideways now so that only one eye was visible. When they had all stopped stretching and bending, this is how they finished up. It's mirrored, but you get the gist. That's an S-C-R-A-M. Can't do anything about the mirror. Scram. Scram! Shouted Mr. Wonka. Get out, quick! People had never moved faster than Grandpa Joe and Charlie and Mr. and Mrs. Bucket at that moment. They all got behind the bed and started pushing like crazy. Mr. Wonka ran in front of them, shouting, Scram! 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 And in 10 seconds flat, all of them were out of the lobby and back inside the great glass elevator. Frantically, Mr. Wonka began undoing bolts and pressing buttons. The door of the great glass elevator snapped shut, and the whole thing leaped sideways. They were away. Whew. And of course, all of them, including the 3 older ones in the bed, floated up again into the air. Oh! What's going to happen next? Chapter 8. Can't say it. The Vermicious Knids. Vermicious Knids. Remember, they were referenced in the last one. James and the Giant Peach. Well, they were, yes. Oh, my goodness me! Gasped Mr. Wonka. Oh, my sainted pants! Oh, my painted ants! Oh, my crawling cats! I hope never to see anything like that ever again! He floated over to the white button and pressed it. The booster rockets fired. The elevator shot forward at such a speed that soon the Space Hotel was out of sight far behind. But who were those awful creatures? Charlie asked. You mean you didn't know? Cried Mr. Wonka. Well, it's a good thing you didn't. If you had even the faintest idea of what horrors you were up against, the marrow would have run out of your bones. You'd have been fossilized with fear and glued to the ground. Then they'd have got you. You'd have been a cooked cucumber. You'd have been rasped into 1,000 tiny bits, grated like cheese, and flocculated alive. They'd have made necklaces from your knuckle bones and bracelets from your teeth, because those creatures, my dear ignorant boy, are the most brutal, vindictive, venomous, murderous beasts in the entire universe. Here Mr. Wonka paused and ran the tip of a pink tongue all the way round his lips. Vermicious Knids, he cried. That's what they are. He sounded the K. Knids, like that. I thought they were grobes, Charlie said. Those oozy-woozy grobes you were telling the president about. Oh, no, I just made those up to scare the president. Scare the White House, Mr. Wonka answered. But there's nothing made up about the Vermicious Knids, believe you me. They live, as everybody else knows, on the planet Vermes, which is 18,427 million miles away, and they are very, very clever brutes indeed. The Vermicious Knids can turn itself into any shape it wants. It has no bones. Its body is really one huge muscle, enormously strong, but very stretchy and squishy, like a mixture of rubber and putty with steel wires inside. Normally, it is egg-shaped, but it can just as easily give itself 2 legs like a human, or 4 legs like a horse. It can become as round as a ball or as long as a kite string. From 50 yards away, a fully grown Vermicious Knid could stretch out its neck and bite your head off without even getting up.
Bite your head off with what?
Said Grandma Georgina.
I didn't see any mouth.
They have other things to bite with, said Mr. Wonka darkly.
Such as what?
Said Grandma Georgina. Ring off, said Mr. Wonka. Your time's up, but listen, everybody. I've just had a funny thought. There I was, fooling around with the president, pretending we were creatures from some other planet, and by golly, there actually were creatures from some other planet on board. Do you think there were many? Charlie asked. More than the 5 we saw? Thousands, said Mr. Wonka. There are 500 rooms in that space hotel, and there's probably a family of them in every room. Somebody's going to get a nasty shock when they go on board, said Grandpa Joe. They'll be eaten like peanuts, said Mr. Wonka, every one of them. You don't really mean that, do you, Mr. Wonka? Charlie asked. Of course I mean it, said Mr. Wonka. These Vermicious Knids are the terror of the universe. They travel through space in great swarms, landing on other stars and planets and destroying everything they find. There used to be some rather nice creatures living on the moon a long time ago. They were called Poozers, but the Vermicious Cnids ate the lot. They did the same on Venus and Mars and many other planets. Why haven't they come down to our Earth and eaten us? Charlie asked. Well, they've tried to, Charlie, many times, but they never made it. You see, all around the Earth, there's a vast envelope of air and gas, and anything hitting that at a high speed gets red hot. Space capsules are made of special heat-proof metal, and when they make a re-entry, their speeds are reduced right down to about 2,000 miles an hour, first by retro-rockets, and then by something called friction. But even so, they get badly scorched. Cnids, which are not heat-proof at all, and don't have any retro-rockets, they get sizzled up completely before they're halfway through. Have you ever seen a shooting star? Lots of them, Charlie said. Actually, they're not shooting stars at all, said Mr. Wonka. They're shooting Cnids. They're Cnids trying to enter the Earth's atmosphere at high speed and going up in flames.
What rubbish!
Said Grandma Georgina. You wait, said Mr. Wonka. You may see it happening before the day is done. But if they're so fierce and dangerous, Charlie said, why didn't they eat us up right away in the space hotel? Why did they waste time twisting their bodies into letters and writing scram? Because they're show-offs, Mr. Wonka replied. They're tremendously proud of being able to write like that. But why say scram when they wanted to catch us and eat us? It's the only word they know, Mr. Wonka said. Look! Screamed Grandma Josephine. Oh, sorry, wrong use of the word look. Look! Screamed Grandma Josephine, pointing through the glass. Over there! Before he even looked, Charlie knew exactly what he was going to see. So did the others. They could tell by the high, hysterical note in the old lady's voice. And there it was, cruising effortlessly alongside them, a simple, colossal, vermicious Cnid, as thick as a whale, as long as a lorry, with a most brutal, vermicious look in its eye. It was no more than a dozen yards away, egg-shaped, slimy, greenish-brown, with one malevolent red eye, the only one visible, fixed intently upon the people floating inside the great glass elevator.
The end has come!
Screamed Grandma Georgina. He'll eat us all! Cried Mrs. Bucket. In one gulp, said Mr. Bucket. We're done for, Charlie, said Grandpa Joe. Charlie nodded. He couldn't speak or make a sound. His throat was seized up with fright. But this time Mr. Wonka didn't panic. He remained perfectly calm. We'll soon get rid of that, he said, and he pressed 6 buttons all at once, and 6 booster rockets went off simultaneously under the elevator. The elevator leapt forward like a stung horse, faster and faster, but the great green, greasy Cnid kept pace alongside it with no trouble at all.
Make it go away!
Yelled Grandma Georgina.
I can't stand it looking at me!
Dear lady, said Mr. Wonka, it can't possibly get in here. I don't mind admitting I was a trifle alarmed back there in the Space Hotel, and with good reason. But here we have nothing to fear. The great glass elevator is shock-proof, waterproof, bomb-proof, bulletproof, and Cnid-proof. So just relax and enjoy it. Oh, you Cnid, you are vile and vermicious, cried Mr. Wonka. You are slimy and soggy and squishous. But what do we care? 'Cause you can't get in here, so hop it and don't get ambitious. At this point, the massive Cnid outside turned and started cruising away from the elevator. There you are, cried Mr. Wonka, triumphant. It's heard me, it's going home. But Mr. Wonka was wrong. When the creature was about 100 yards off, it stopped hovering for a moment. It stopped, hovered for a moment, then went smoothly into reverse, coming back towards the elevator with its rear end, which was the pointed end of the egg. Now in front, the rear end of front. Even going backwards, its acceleration was unbelievable. It was like some monstrous bullet coming at them. As it came so fast, nobody had time even to cry out. Crash! It struck the great glass elevator with a most enormous bang, and the whole thing shivered and shook, but the glass held, and the Cnid bounced off like a rubber ball. What did I tell you? Shouted Mr. Wonka, triumphant. We're safe as sausages in here.
We'll have a nasty headache after that.
He will, said Grandpa Joe. It's not his head. It's his bottom, said Charlie. Look, look, there's a big bump coming out of the pointed end where he's hit. It's going black and blue. And so it was. A purple, bruisey bump the size of a small car was appearing on the pointed rear end of the giant Knid. Hello, you dirty great beast! Cried Mr. Wonka. There's a picture. There they are. There he is. Hello, you great Knid! Tell us, how do you do? You're a rather strange colour today. Your bottom is purple and lavender blue. Should it really be looking that way? Are you not feeling well? Are you going to faint? Is it something we cannot discuss? It must be a very unpleasant complaint, for your backside's as big as a bus. Let me get you a doctor. I know just the man for a Knid with a nasty disease. He's a butcher by trade, which is not a bad plan, and he charges quite reasonable fees. Ah, here he is now. Doc, you really are kind to travel so far into space. There's your patient, the Knid, with the purple behind. Do you think it's a desperate case? Great heavens above! It's no wonder he's pale, said the doc, with a horrible grin. There's a sort of balloon on the end of his tail. I must prick it at once with a pin. Doink. So he got out a thing like an Indian spear, with feathers all over the top. And he lunged, and he caught the Knid smack in the rear. But alas, the balloon didn't pop. Cried the Knid, what on earth am I going to do with this painful, preposterous lump? I can't remain standing the whole summer through, and I cannot sit down on my rump. It's a bad case of rear ache, the medico said, and it's something I cannot repair. If you want to sit down, you must sit on your head, with your bottom high up in the air. That's all for today. 2 short chapters, but, come back tomorrow at 5:30 for the last one of this week to find out what they're going to do about these vermicious Knids. I always thought they were rather scary as a child, but they are just... yeah. Cool. Hope you enjoyed yourself. See you tomorrow at 5:30. Please share these videos if you can and if you will. Goodbye for now.